The way you peek angles in Valorant is arguably the most important thing to understand. Simply approaching an angle like this can get you killed, but swinging it this way can net you a kill. Why, you might ask? Well, if you want to understand more about peeking and gain an understanding of what peeks to use and where, you've come to the right place. Valorant has quite a few peeks that are really popular and very useful. Let me quickly break them down. Starting out, you have the information/non-committal peeking techniques, which include the jump peek to peek without committing to challenging an angle and gain information, and the jiggle peek to bait op shots by strafing quickly or gather information similar to the jump peek. Then, for fighting peeks, you have the standard peek, which has been a staple for a long time now, the wide swing to really commit to a fight and throw off your opponent's crosshair placement, the pop and swing, which is pretty much just an exaggerated wide swing, and finally, in sort of a category of its own, we have something I call the clearing peek. This really isn't a peek of its own, but it's an application of the standard peek combined with this little trick you can do to move without making a sound. To pull this off, there's a short distance that you can move that actually doesn't make any noise and appears pretty quickly from the enemy's POV. The timing for this is kind of tight, and it's something you'll want to get used to if you haven't done it before in a custom match. And there's some really good applications for this that I'll cover shortly. There's more peeks out there, but those that I just broke down cover the ones you'll commonly encounter and use yourself. Remember, with all of these peeks, your movement is essential, and before using them, you should really take the time to practice them so that when you're using them in a game, you don't mess up the movement inputs and get yourself killed. Now that you understand the essentials, a big chunk of what I want to focus on in this video is understanding when to use a certain peek. And to do that, I'll break down some examples, go through common scenarios, and discuss the peeking theory. What I mean by the peeking theory is the train of thought that goes into picking a peek for a certain situation. And deciding this generally comes with lots of hours of playtime and experience, but also learning why certain peeks are better than others in certain situations. To start out, I want to make a brief mention about the jump peek and the jiggle peek. Like I said before, these are purely used for information gaining and shot baiting. If you know an enemy is opping a certain angle, you can use one of these two peeks to bait out a shot and reposition. Or, if you're playing an angle with a cover obstacle like C long on Haven, you can use the jump peek to get information without committing to a gunfight. These peeks are really useful and give you a lot of value when used properly. Next, we have combat peeks, which are the most important to get right. As you most likely know, most of the time you should be using the standard peek. This peek is neutral in commitment and fast when performed properly. A big mistake that many players make with this peek and peeks in general is shift walking. When you want to peek an angle, you want to do it as quickly as possible, with as much control as possible. Shift walking is fine, just remember not to use it when you're going to take a fight. Moving on, we have the wide swing, which is one of the most commonly misused peeks in Valorant. The best use for a wide swing is when you know an enemy is holding a certain angle, you have a rough idea of where they're peeking, and you want to commit to a fight. The reason this is the case with this swing is because it's very committal. Once you wide swing, you're able to be shot and often are going to be locked into a fight if anyone's holding the angle that you're wide swinging. So if you just wide swing into the open without getting any information, generally you're going to be at a disadvantage. This doesn't always mean you're going to lose the fight when you wide swing without info, because we've all seen time and time again those Reynas that wide swing every angle and hit nasty flicks. But this is unreliable, and that's what peeking is all about, giving yourself an edge. Let me give you an example of where you'd want to use a wide swing and one where you would not want to use a wide swing. So let's say at the start of a round, I info peek from tiles on B main and see an opponent holding cat. Here, if I'm feeling confident and I want to take this fight, this is an example of when a wide swing would be useful. The reason is that I know the enemy's position, and if I standard peek, that's probably where their crosshair is placed. So by wide swinging, I'm throwing off their crosshair placement and giving myself a better chance in the fight. In another scenario, let's say I'm pushing A main on Ascent, and I want to start clearing angles while my teammates prepare utility for a site take. This is an example where I would not use a wide swing. And this segues really well into my next point, which is talking about angle clearing with a concept commonly known as slicing the pie or isolating angles. See, when you're in a situation where you don't have information about the location of enemies and you don't have control of a certain area, you need to clear these angles to take control. But how do you go about doing that? Well, the easiest way is to use utility like a Sova Dart, Fade Eye, Gecko Flash, and etc. to gain information about enemy positions. But we don't always have that luxury, and you can't use utility to clear every single angle. So in cases where you aren't using utility to clear, you should use the clearing peak that I demonstrated earlier. By taking advantage of this peak, you can clear angles one by one and peak them at a faster rate than most enemies will be ready for and be completely silent while doing it. Now this is where slicing the pie comes in. Instead of just wide swinging and being exposed to every angle on the site, you should take each angle one at a time and position yourself to not be exposed to a new angle until you've cleared the one before. If I was doing this on Haven's A main, it would look something like this. For the last part of this video, I want to run you through a couple of examples and give you some options for how you could approach the situation based on everything you've learned today. In example 1, let's imagine you're peeking mid on split from market. On this angle, a teammate has told you there's an enemy peeking the right side of vents with an op. What options do you have to approach this? Well, first, let's talk about what not to do. If you know someone's opping this angle, the last thing you want to do is standard peek or wide swing. If you use one of these two peeks without any utility, the enemy on the op who's watching this angle has the complete advantage. And you don't want to rely on them missing the shot as your only option. To approach the situation, here's a couple of options you could do. First, since you know they're opping, you could jiggle peek or jump peek to bait out a shot and then wide swing to take control and hold the angle. Or you could also choose to not challenge the op at all and just smoke off the angle, and then begin clearing angles and developing your control of mid with the clearing peak I talked about earlier. So now that I've demonstrated one example, I want to give you a chance to approach a situation and pick an option. If you wanted to peek a site on Haven, how would you do it? A. Wide swing. B. Info peek and then begin isolating angles. Or C. Slow walk on the left wall and play contact. Well, the answer here generally is B. Info peek and then begin clearing angles. Wide swinging with no utility before you know where enemies are positioned is pretty dangerous. You could be shot from all of these different angles. And slow walking on the left wall is a very predictable move and often the first angle anyone who peeks from backside or heaven is going to check. Plus, since you're slow walking, you're a very easy to hit target. By starting off with an info peek, you get to see if anyone's holding an angle and now have information on their position if you want to peek them. And if they aren't peeking, you can begin moving up and clearing angle by angle with your teammates using the clearing strategy we talked about before. Now, this is an exaggerated example, and oftentimes you aren't going to have to clear a main this way because you'll have smokes, duelists to entry, and other utility and pressure from teammates. But it's important to understand the options you have when approaching a site. The unfortunate thing about peeking is it's very situational. There's a lot of variables to account for in every situation. Things like agent utility, skill level of opponents, confidence, and a million other factors play into how your opponents are going to play different situations. But hopefully, with the explanation and examples that you've seen throughout this video, you now feel more comfortable and confident when approaching angles. Now, I know this video has been a real info dump, so don't worry if you feel overwhelmed. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Anyways, this has been valued, and I'll see you in the next one.